Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode review of Game of Thrones Season 8. And this is episode number 3. And without sugarcoating anything, this is probably the biggest episode of the series thus far. And I mean that in many different ways, but specifically, it is literally the biggest episode of all time because of just sheer scale. And it's also the one probably with the most stakes. And I mean that because as we've been building up to this point, this is the big battle that has been inevitable probably since the very beginning of the first season. I think the very first scene of the series, we were introduced to the White Walkers beyond the wall, to the Night King, and all that type of mystical, magical stuff. But before I get into all that, the title of the episode is The Long Night, and it could literally have been titled The Battle of Winterfell, The Battle for Winterfell, The Battle just in general. But yes, this is another episode that takes place entirely at Winterfell. And this is where all the action is literally happening this season. And please excuse me if I'm a little all over the place with this episode review because this episode is a lot to take in. It is, like I said, the biggest episode we've probably seen so far. And I kind of want to mention that right now because the sheer production of this episode is massive. It's on an unprecedented level of scale. It's just kind of all out warfare from nearly the beginning of this episode to the end. And as we saw at the very end of last week's episode, the White Walkers and the Night King and his army is literally at the doorstep of Winterfell. And it is now time for all of our protagonists to get down and fight. And fight they did all the way to a very interesting ending. But I'll get into that when we get to it. But first up, I want to say that this production was typically lengthy for a television series. For just literally this one episode, they shot for 11 weeks, I heard, with 55 days worth of night shoots, which is like movie level of production. That's the scale in which they are working at on this episode, and you can tell there is just so much going on in it, um so many people involved in terms of extras and all of the principal cast and all that kind of stuff. But it starts off here with a little calm before the storm. Everybody's getting ready, everybody's getting in position. Tyrion is making his way down to the crypt along with all of the other women and children. And he of course grabs a flagon of wine, I assume, because I mean, if you're gonna ride out, I guess what they assume is the apocalypse, you might as well do it while you are have a little bit of a buzz with you, I guess. So he is no stranger to drinking during pivotal moments of certain, events. So he is going down there. Sansa ends up joining him later on, but I'll get to that. Basically, it starts off with kind of a first shot across the bow, if you will. All of the Dothraki are ready to charge on horseback. That's kind of where their military might really is, or their strength really lies, is on their ability to fight on horseback. But before they get going, before they're able to charge into battle, Melisandre shows back up literally right before it's about all to go down, and she uses her magic abilities to light up all of their swords, all of their sabers, if you will, to ride into battle. And it leads to a very cool aesthetic of just all of the different swords lighting up all across one another. It's a really amazingly well done shot. This whole episode is amazingly well shot, and I'll get into one of the major conflicts about the episode is how it is shot, how dark it is literally shot. But first up, we have Melisandre lighting up all of the sabers, and they are led into battle with Jorah Mormont leading them ahead of the pack, and he's leading the Dothraki army, and you see them kind of ride off into the distance. There's great shots of the horses running, close up shots, just really getting intense. This whole episode is really tenseful, really stressful. If you are a viewer at home, it's just really got you by the throat. And they ride in, and all you see is this massive wide shot of all of the lighted swords begin to start going out. They kind of starts dwindling and dwindling and dwindling, and you kind of just hear silence, and the silence is deafening because all the people waiting back that are in front of Winterfell in Winterfell are watching this, and they are. Somewhat horrified at what they're seeing because it seems like everyone who just charged into battle is now dead. But but out of the silence and out of the darkness comes a few retreating Dothraki as well as Sir Jorah Mormont, and he looks rattled, like beyond belief at what he sees. And what he sees is what we are about to see is literally these white army comes charging at the people outside of Winterfell, the army, the men outside of Winterfell that are fighting, and it's mostly the Unsullied army, I think, that are outside of Winterfell. They kind of are in their phalanx military movement, basically with their long spears and just kind of very compact, and they're just uh, with their spears stuck out just to really beat back the horde. And also, I think Tormund Giantsbane and the Wildlings are out there as well, and they all kind of get this first wave, this first brunt of the Dead Army's force, and it's really, really just like movie level battle type sequences that we get in this film, right from the get in this film. Like I said, I'm almost calling it a film, but it's not. It's a television episode, and you get that movie level of battle sequence. And what is interesting is after the Dothraki are kind of dispatched pretty much, Dany decides that she's going to fly out with her dragon, and John tries to stop her because the initial plan is to lure the Night King out and then attack him with the dragons and try to defeat him with the dragons. But she, after seeing, I guess, the Dothraki and her personal ties to them, she gets very emotional and she kind of decides to go on her dragon, and John joins her. So during the fight with the Unsullied and the Wildlings against the Whites, they start blasting the Dead Army with the dragon fire, and it's a pretty epic sequence. It's kind of amazing to see, and most of the people fighting are kind of in awe of it as well. And it's very cinematic, but of course, the Night King knew that those dragons were coming out soon enough, and he had a defense against them. And through his magical abilities, I assume he is able to create just this fog and this wind that just creates this cloud where the dragons can't see, and Dany and John can't see, so they are pretty much taken out of the fight right there, which is of course a huge advantage for them. Having two dragons on your side is a big advantage. Who knew? And it's very interesting how their actions play out throughout the episode because they're kind of out of the major battle sequence for a while because they're kind of just flying around out there. And there's an amazing, amazing shot, one of the most brilliant shots I've ever seen in this show, of them flying, of them above the clouds, and you just see the moonlight behind them, and it's just majestic. It's amazing. The cinematography in this episode, like I said, at times is just absurdly stunning, and it really goes to show, the people directing the episode and the production people behind it, and what the aesthetic they really want for it. Yeah, the cinematographer for this episode was Fabian Wagner, and he has shot several episodes of Game of Thrones before. Yeah, he has shot 8 episodes, including this one, I believe. So he's no stranger to the overall aesthetic of this world. And like I said, the the battle takes in well, I haven't actually said this. The battle takes entirely at night. So most of what we see is lit by fire, and it gives you this really sense of unevenness. Not only unevenness, but worrisome or nerves and anxiety because you don't really know where the enemy is coming from. Not only the characters in the show, but you as a viewer just are fully immersed in this world. That's what I really love about that dark aesthetic is you're put right in there with them. And at times it's like massive close-ups, at times it's wide shots, at times it's rapid editing. It's just really overwhelming if you are a viewer. And it's immersive, like I said. But I guess I might as well touch on it right now. A lot of people complained that the episode was too dark, where they couldn't see things, and they were afraid that they were going to miss certain character deaths, or they were going to miss certain important moments. And it's very interesting that it is like that. It's done that way purposely, like I said, to give the sense of immersiveness and, to put you on edge. But there's also a technical aspect to it that I think people aren't taking into effect. And it's kind of up in the air whether you could avoid it or not. Basically, from what I've understood is it's a combination of several things. One, it's a combination of how you're viewing the episode. Are you viewing it through a or satellite service? Are you viewing it through streaming? How strong is the bandwidth for the streaming that you're getting it? What's the quality of it? What's the quality of your cable or satellite streaming? Because a lot of times, the video quality can be compressed. And when you get video compression, you see a lot of artifacts in the screen. You see a lot of little kind of snow type things or squiggly lines or things like that. Those are all compression artifacts, and they make it very difficult for you to see what is going on. Those typically happen and are more noticeable when it's darker sequences in movies and television. So that's what you got a lot here. I know I got it with my cable service, and my cable service isn't the best when it comes to streaming HD quality content, like really good, crisp HD quality content. They don't really do a good job with. And there are some people who are able to stream it and watch it and have none of those problems. Another aspect of it is just your TV settings. TV settings for many, many people are things they don't know or are aware of how to change and manipulate to make their viewing experience that much better because they really just aren't aware of it. They don't know that what they're watching and the way in which it's presented, it may not be the best way in which to watch something. And sometimes the default settings, the regular settings that come with the television right out of the box are not the best. They tend to be on the brighter side because in when you go into a store and you see the televisions on display, they're typically at their brightest settings to really show you how the colors are popping, how bright the display is, and how clear it is, and all that kind of stuff. And that may not work for everything you're going to watch. It really all depends on what you're viewing will dictate what your settings are. So that's one of those things. Also, people tend to watch television in brightly lit rooms or just regularly lit rooms, and that can lead to a lot of glare and lead to a lot of problems when it comes to viewing darker scenes in movies and television shows. So you really have to turn off your lights and get it as dark as you possibly can and really give it that cinematic experience that the show has definitely been going for now for seasons. Excuse me. I basically watch my movies and television in that mode anyways because where I sit, basically right here, there's a lot of glare on the screen which is in front of me, which you can't see. My television is right there, but there's a lot of glare. So to cut out that glare, I just cut out the lights. So that's kind of my little spiel on it. I didn't have too big a problem. I've watched it, a couple of times over, and being able to rewatch the episode and kind of understand what's going on really helps you with it. And also, when it comes to the character deaths, you really understand the ones that happen, and they happen. And the first one happens relatively soon. In that kind of front melee that kind of ensues afterward, right in front of Winterfell, Dolores Ed, who took over for John's position at the leader of the Night's Watch. He's the first one to go that we know of. He dies, protecting Sam, as many people have done. Many people have protected Sam because Sam is not the most adept when it comes to, using a sword or military might or anything like that. And it's very interesting how, I mean, he survived the episode. I'm not quite sure how. I'm really not quite sure how. Realistically, he probably should have died. Just from the sheer amount of carnage and just ferocity of the opponent, he probably should have died. But he didn't die. Um, Basically, the Winterfell, their armies pushed back to get inside of Winterfell. Lyanna Mormont is another death that happened. Little Lyanna Mormont, who was the head of House Mormont, dies in the episode, but she goes out typically like a heroine badass, just taking out a white that's a giant, and man, it's really sad to see her go because she's such a badass character. And later on in the episode, Sir Jorah Mormont also dies, who has been with us pretty much since the first episode. There was that whole time when he wasn't by Danny's side and he was off and he had grayscale and all that kind of stuff, but he was in the first episode, so he's been throughout the entire series a fixture in the show. So he was probably the biggest death. Beric Dondarrion was another one who died in the episode. Yet again, not a real big loss for me because he was a character who didn't have that much development and he wasn't really one of the main players, but he was also a character who was around for a very long time. He was a character whose name at least was in the first season, I believe, because initially he was sent out by Ned Stark to hunt the Mountain, I believe, for a crime that the Mountain had committed. And yeah, so he goes way back as well. And the one that I knew was going to happen, my number one draft pick, if you will, for characters who were going to die was Theon Greyjoy. And Theon Greyjoy ended up dying heroically to a certain extent, defending Bran against the Night King, which was an amazing sequence at the end of this episode. But let me touch on a few things before we get to that final big moment. You got Arya Stark. Speaking of big moments, Arya shows up. She's fighting on the parapets. She has that staff, that double-edged dragonglass staff that she had Gendry make for her. Gendry is we see him a few times during the battle. He's kicking some ass. Brienne and Jamie have some great battle sequences together. There is one sequence that is yet again another just amazing shot. It's them fighting back to back, basically on the parapets. The parapets are basically, the ledges that you look over to see outside of the castle. That's what a parapet is, if you aren't aware of it. Hopefully, that's the name of that thing. I believe it is. But anyways, they're fighting back to back, and there's just a wide shot of them fighting, and there's just this glowing red background that is the fire that has been lit around Winterfell, and you just see them, teaming up and going at it together, and it's really poetic and beautiful. And someone brought this up on Twitter, and I can't remember who it was, and I'm sorry for not giving them the full credit, but this wasn't something I did. Someone mentioned how beautiful it was that the swords they are using are basically two halves of the sword that Ned Stark used, and it's really interesting that they are using it now to defend Winterfell and pretty much defend his legacy, his lineage with his children, and all that kind of stuff. And it's really poetic, really beautiful. They survived the battle, which I didn't know if Brienne would, but she did. And she was a full-on badass throughout. Like I said, Arya was a badass throughout. The Hound was also in the fight as well, and he got interestingly vulnerable and scared. And it's so interesting to see when large people or like really like tall, strong people have this sense of vulnerability to them because you don't expect it. You expect these people always to be, big, strongly masculine, whatever. And no, he got scared because there was a time where Beric Dondarrion was trying to get him back in the fight, and he was like, "What are we doing? This is, screw that. We can't fight death. We're fighting death, and you can't beat it." And once he saw that Arya needed help, he threw himself back into the battle. And Arya had a great sequence within the library that was extremely tenseful, where it was her kind of creeping around, trying to avoid being detected, and she ends up being, eventually being attacked by a bunch of whites and is saved by Beric Dondarrion and the Hound, and that was a great tight sequence. Really close quarters, really claustrophobic, really well done. Like I said, Melisandre showed up at the beginning of the episode, and she had another moment earlier on where she used her magic to light the pit that was, like I said, the fire pit surrounding Winterfell. And once she did that, it was another really tense moment. This whole episode really tense, really stressful, where she's trying to light this fire, she's trying to light this fire, and the wind wasn't allowing the torches to do it, so she was using her magic. And she couldn't get it to go, couldn't get it to go. And there was a really rapid cross cut between her saying her magic words and trying to light the fire and just, the oncoming onslaught of the dead army. And it was really, really well done. Once it was lit up, there was a great wide shot of just all the pit being lit up around Winterfell. Really well done. Bran, of course, was being protected, I believe, in the Godswood by Theon and a bunch of other men, and he was kind of um reserved once again throughout the episode. He was someone who I think people expected him to do something grand and, something unexpected, and what we ended up getting was exactly what we've always gotten from Bran recently, which was nothing. It's really weird to say. It was nothing, but it stayed true to the character that he is now, the three-eyed raven, where the three-eyed raven, I don't think is an aggressively offensive force. He's someone that is intrinsic to the natural world and just kind of above it all when it comes to these human interactions. And it was very interesting how he was able to also warg into or into these crows or these ravens, if you will, and they flew off. And that was where we got to see the Night King for the first time. And the Night King, using his magical abilities, able to command his army from afar, decides to just have them sacrifice themselves on top of that fire pit and just have everybody and then everybody pile over the bodies. And these are all dispendable soldiers to him. They're nothing to him. They really are. They're just wastes of like things. And he could just make more if he wanted to, which he did do in this episode, which was once again just incredible to see. And once he did that, was I think the moment where he started to engage himself in the battle a lot more, and we got to see a really cool dragon fight between Danny, John, and him, and it was interestingly well done. We all knew that this was kind of coming. We could all kind of predict certain, battle moments that were going to happen. This was one of them, and it happened. And I think John's dragon took most of the brunt, and he ended up being like thrust to the ground or something like that. Danny's dragon later on was kind of accosted by a lot of whites and had to fly away and leave her behind essentially while it dealt with all that, and she was left all alone. And of course Sir Jorah Mormont swooped in to save her, as he's done, because as we've known pretty much forever that he's madly in love with her, and she only really believes that he is a very close friend. And he unfortunately died rescuing her. He got stabbed multiple times. Very heroic, very very well done for his character. And I think it's if his character was going to go out at any point, this is the way he was probably wanted to go out, and it was very very beautiful. Back to Arya and the Hound and Beric Dondarrion. Beric Dondarrion dies, and then Melisandre basically tells uh, Arya that we've met before. Arya remembers her. They met way back in season 3 when she went and kind of scooped up Gendry and to put those leeches on him and stuff, because that's when he found out he was the bastard son of Robert Baratheon. And now she's back once again, and she's kind of prophesized that Arya would play a very important role in all of this, and also that Arya would kill many, many people along the way in her life, and she did. She became a badass assassin who is killing a lot, who has killed a lot of people. And lo and behold, at the end of this episode, she was the one who ended up killing the Night King. But before we get to that, something that happened that people were predicting um, was when the when the Night King landed, he he started his main assault on Winterfell. He blasted it. He landed, and he had the fire. He had the ice fire, or whatever it's called, the blue fire. Blasted Winterfell. He landed, and he started raising all of the dead. Not only basically raising the dead of the people who had already been killed from the good guys' side. And once he did that, he also kind of raised a bunch of bodies that were in the crypt as well. I remember last week's episode I had thought that maybe they were going to do this, but I didn't think they were gonna go that dark, and of course they did. Uh, I decided I'm just gonna walk back my prediction on that because it did indeed happen. And of course, probably people down in the crypt who were the most vulnerable ended up dying. Lots of them did. It led to a really great scene between Sansa and Tyrion, who were hiding behind some type of tomb, and he held her hand, kissed her hand. It was very beautiful and very sentimental because they have a very interesting relationship with one another, having been, literally married at some point back at King's Landing. Their relationship is very interesting to me. I'm curious where it goes from here. I'm curious where it ends up because I think that there is something there between the two. I don't think it's romantic. It's a respect. It's a friendship, I think, because I think of all of the people that Sansa has come into in her life that treated her poorly, he was one that didn't, and he could have. He could have done what all of the others had done, especially at King's Landing, where basically Sansa was the prisoner. He kind of treated her regularly. He didn't abuse her in any way, and it's a very interesting aspect between the two. And I believe there is also a deleted scene of them actually fighting some whites down in the crypt, which I hope they put up on the Blu-ray when it comes out in a few months, or maybe it's up on HBO.com right now in the extras because I know they have like a kind of episode production recap for each episode that shows like what how they were shooting a scene or how the actors felt about a certain scene and all that kind of stuff. I typically don't watch those now because they can be a little spoilerish. I've heard people talk about how the actors, when they're interviewed, they'll be wearing a certain garment or they'll be wearing certain armor or something that dictates or can lead to us predicting what is going to happen to their character later on. So I'm going to stay away from all of that stuff right now. I think once it's over, maybe I'll go back and watch all of those little extras that HBO has put up about it. But fast forwarding, I guess, to the end of the episode where we get Arya killing the Night King, and the whole sequence is amazing in my opinion. It's haunting, it's brilliantly well done, it's maximized for its emotion and its tenseness, and also it shows a kind of fatal flaw in the Night King. The whole sequence kind of starts with the Night King landing, and Danny decides to attack him with Dragonfire, and it doesn't affect him, and he kind of just smirks and shakes it off, if you will, and he decides to basically. That's when he, I believe, attacks her with all the whites. And she's kind of abandoned there, and Ser Jorah comes in, like I said before. But then he proceeds to go into Winterfell with all of his generals and all that stuff with Jon in relative pursuit, but Jon can't get to him in time to save Bran. He is under siege by the dead dragon who's constantly bombarding him with fire, and he just can't get to him. So you're watching this sequence and it keeps cutting back and forth between the the Night King walking up to Bran and that whole interaction and back to Jon, and you're watching and you're like, oh, Jon, you got to get there to save him. You got to get there to save him. Meanwhile, you kind of forgot perhaps that Arya, after talking with Melisandre, decides to that she is the one that needs to kill the Night King, or is the one that should kill the Night King, or go kill the Night King, essentially. And that's what happens after that little exchange. And but you don't see her for like a good half an hour because this episode is longer than the traditional episode. It is about an hour and 25 minutes, and the typical episode is about 55 to an hour, roughly in there, depending on how HBO, cuts in their promo edits and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so this was a longer episode, so you didn't really see her for a while, so you kind of could have forgotten where she was going or what she was doing because it's not quite obvious initially. And so basically, he's about to kill. Theon sacrifices himself. One goes out like a hero instead of runs away. He apologizes to Bran, and Bran tells him, you know, you're a good man, Theon. Which I think is what Theon always really wanted was some recognition of his worth, especially after all he's been through and after all the degradation he's gone through. He really needed the full redemption arc to come back, and I think this was his full redemption. And so the Night King's about to kill Bran, and Arya kind of, you know, jumps in out of nowhere. I don't know where she jumped from, a tree, they jumped from a wall, she jumped from wherever. Anywho, she was able to completely pass by all of his general dudes who were just hanging out behind him, not really doing anything. Really shitty security, if you ask me. Hopefully, those weren't his best guys, I guess. But yeah, so she swoops in and she has that Valerian steel dagger that Bran gave her from last season. The dagger that was the one that the cutthroat was going to kill him with in season one, and Littlefinger's the one that gave it to him. So he gives it to Arya because she can use it. He's not a fighter or anything like that, and she comes in left-handed to try to stab him, and he grabs her by the throat midair and just holds her there. Dagger drops. She grabs her with her right hand, stabs him, I believe, right in the heart, which I think goes back to kind of the origin story that we saw of how the Night King, was created with something to do with. I don't know if it was dragon glass put in his heart or something like that. It's been a while since I've seen it, so please forgive me not knowing that specific detail. But he shatters, and then all the White Army begins to shatter and shatter and shatter, including the dragon, and it's over. The battle is over. Melisandre comes out, and she initially she when she returned, she told Davos, no need to execute me because I'll be dead before the dawn. She walks out through the carnage of the battle. She drops that jeweled necklace that she has, takes it off, drops it, and what we know is that necklace is kind of magical, and it's what is keeping her, young and beautiful. And she drops it, walks out into the open battlefield, and her body just, decays into its old crippled self, and she just falls and dies, and cut to black. And that's the end of the episode. And man, it is a lot to take in, and I'm not even doing it proper justice. Uh, if you've seen it already, watch it again because I've seen it twice, and I still want to watch it for a third time. That's how many times I just can't get enough of it. But I know there's a lot of criticism with this episode, not only for its aesthetic, but for not living up to quite the amount of hype that I think was put into it, which I think it's a valid criticism, but yet I think it's also a criticism that we created ourselves as viewers and as fans. We all like to build things up in our mind to an almost unbelievable level of expectation that once what we're seeing doesn't live up to it, we are, extremely let down. And I would have liked to have seen something else or something more regarding the Night King, his motivation, his reasoning. Some people kind of just wanted to hear him talk to see what he sounds like. Some people wanted to see more from Bran and what more the powers of being a three-eyed raven entail. Is it just this ability to, kind of predict the future, see through time, and be wise and things like that? And for me, it's interesting because I think Bran knew that this was the outcome the whole time, and he just kind of had to let it happen. I think he knew that if he had interfered in any significant way, it wouldn't have led to coming out the way it came out. He kind of just had to, push a few buttons here and there and kind of let things take their own path. Specifically, giving the dagger to Arya, I think, was an important thing. Also, I think having him be the decoy was, of course, an important thing, and it was a you know a very fate-like thing, and I can understand all the criticism surrounding that. I can also understand some of the criticism surrounding the overall, war game plan of Jon Snow and Dany. It really, didn't go the way it could have gone if had they had done some other type of better strategizing. I understand that aspect of it, and I also understand that it shows the flaws in our characters and our heroes that makes them very human. Danny and John, I think, have made several mistakes in the past and are continuing to make mistakes in the present, and that makes them more rounded characters and makes them, I think, more interesting characters than being completely flawless, if you will. It would make the show a little boring if they weren't flawless. Granted, it can be frustrating if they're also, absurdly dumb as well and do things for contrived reasons. But, that's kind of the way some plot storytelling goes. So going forward, now we have a new foe in Cersei who's kind of just hanging out down in King's Landing, and that is the next hurdle for Danny and John and the North to kind of go through. What is left of this army? I'm not sure because they got absurdly decimated. They were absolutely, completely annihilated to a certain degree. So I don't know what's left for them to fight people to fight Cersei's army in the South. But hey, we'll see in the next episode. There was a sneak peek at the next episode. I think from what we saw, Ghost is still alive. John's direwolf, who kind of ran into battle with the Dothraki, and we didn't really see him show up. And we also, I believe, John's dragon is still alive as well. We may have seen him in the preview as well. So they still have two dragons, which you know I I would I like I like the fact that they still have that leg up on Cersei. I was just checking to see if I missed any of the deaths, and no, I did not. But that's kind of one thing that I know that people have criticisms with is that no major characters died. Um, which I guess is it is kind of contrived to a certain extent, but yet again, there's still one more major hurdle to get through before the series ends. So they're not out of the woods yet. They could die in the final conflict that's about to come up. So I've talked for long enough about um, this episode and about how massive it is. I think overall it's a really great episode. I mentioned on my Facebook page, my Facebook, personal Facebook, that it was the greatest episode of TV ever, and I meant that in the sense of just how unprecedented, how amazing the production of it was. We have never really seen something quite on this scale before, so that's why I think it's one of the greatest, or perhaps the greatest ever from a production standpoint. Greatly, it probably, if you had to look at all the Game of Thrones episodes, it's maybe not even the best we've seen so far. There probably have been other episodes. Hard Home was a great episode. Battle of the Bastards was a great episode that I know people love. I love that episode as well. But I think this one was really, really good, and the production was amazing. So, with all that being said, please, if you like this video, check out the other videos on my channel. Thank you all for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I'm going to be, of course, doing these episode reviews for as long as the series goes, which is 3 more episodes, and then it will probably be back to regularly done movie reviews and Blu-ray reviews and all that kind of stuff that can be seen on here. So once again, thank you all for watching.